Zara was born under the soft hum of dawn, a day when even the birds seemed to whisper secrets to the waking earth. From her earliest days she was different, not because of how she looked but because of what she could hear. While other children chattered and played, Zara would sit quietly, her wide eyes focused on shadows and sounds unseen. She heard the unspoken words in her mother's fading smile, the lies hidden behind a neighbor's cheerful nod, and the secrets buried deep beneath the village's well-worn paths. Her gift was both a blessing and a curse. It allowed her to understand the unspoken fears of her people but also made her painfully aware of the bitterness and deceit lurking in places that should have been safe. The villagers whispered about her ability, calling her the cursed listener, fearing that the spirits themselves had touched her ears. They said she could hear the whispers of the stones and the wind, secrets meant to be hidden from mortal ears. Muna, her stepmother, resented Zara deeply. Cold and stern, Muna often scolded Zara for her silence, interpreting it as defiance. But it was more than that. Zara's silence was a shield, a way to guard herself against the painful truths she heard every day. Muna's hatred grew with every secret Zara uncovered, every silent accusation she seemed to hear from the air. The stepmother called her cursed, a danger to the family's honor, and tried to break her spirit with harsh words and cruel commands. Despite Muna's cruelty, Zara's curiosity never dimmed. She would steal away to quiet places, the riverbank where the water sang, the shade of the ancient baobab tree where the wind whispered, to listen. Her ears caught the stories no one else dared to hear. A mother weeping silently for a lost child, a man hiding his shame behind a forced smile, the earth itself murmuring of change. One evening, as the village gathered for a festival under the starlit sky, Zara sat apart, her senses alive with the hum of hidden voices. The village elders told tales of spirits that listened to the truth and punished lies. Zara felt the weight of those stories more than anyone else. She knew the truth was a heavy burden, and the more she heard, the more isolated she became. Her stepmother's eyes followed her with suspicion and anger, but Zara remained calm, wrapped in the quiet strength of her listening. In her heart, she knew that hearing the truth was not a curse but a gift, one that would one day change the fate of the village and the silent stones that held its history. The night air was thick with tension long before the eruption. Zara had always been careful with what she listened to, knowing that some secrets could burn if spoken aloud. But one evening, as the village settled into uneasy quiet, she overheard a conversation that chilled her to the bone. Hidden behind a cracked door, she heard her stepmother Muna's harsh words, confessions of cruelty, lies spun to cover bruises and broken spirits, a hidden darkness that no one else dared speak of. The weight of the secret pressed heavily on Zara's heart. She had always known Muna's coldness was more than just sternness. It was a dangerous fire masked by forced smiles. But hearing the truth so clearly, so close, was more than she could bear. Her lips trembled, her mind raced. Should she speak? Could she tell anyone without risking herself? Before she could make a decision, the fury of Muna burst forth. The stepmother's face was twisted with rage as she stormed into Zara's small room. "You listen too much. You hear what should be hidden," Muna spat, eyes blazing with a terrifying mix of hatred and fear. Without a word of warning, her hands grabbed at Zara's ears, yanking violently at the delicate earrings that Zara had cherished, gifts from her late mother. The sharp, ripping pain shot through Zara's head as the earrings were torn free, dragging her earlobes with them. Blood trickled down her cheeks, mixing with tears she couldn't shed fast enough. Zara collapsed onto the floor, clutching her bleeding ears, the sound of her stepmother's hateful screams fading into a cruel silence that settled over her like a heavy shroud. The world grew quiet. The familiar chorus of village sounds, the rustling leaves, the distant laughter, the evening calls of birds, was suddenly gone. She was deaf. The noise stopped completely. At first, panic consumed her. How would she live in a world without sound? Would she ever hear the comforting whisper of the wind or the laughter of children again? Fear threatened to swallow her whole. But in that deep silence, something else began to happen. Beneath her bed, where the wooden floorboards creaked softly, Zara felt a strange vibration. It was faint at first, almost like a heartbeat pulsing through the earth itself. She pressed her fingers to the cool wood and listened, not with her ears but with something deeper, something ancient. The stones beneath her bed began to murmur. Their voices were soft, like a breeze slipping through leaves, full of secrets older than the village, older than the hills surrounding them. They spoke in a language of echoes and shadows, of truths buried beneath layers of soil and time. Zara could not understand the words fully, but their meaning was clear. She was not alone. As days passed, Zara's connection with the stones grew stronger. They told her stories of the village's hidden past, whispered warnings of dangers lurking beneath the surface, and offered comfort when the loneliness of silence threatened to overwhelm her. Though her ears were broken, her soul listened more keenly than ever before. Muna's fury did not abate. She feared the power Zara was gaining, though she could not comprehend it. The villagers whispered among themselves, some pitying the girl who could no longer hear, others fearing the strange glimmer in her eyes, the way she seemed to speak to the very earth. Zara learned to communicate through the language of the stones, their murmurs guiding her steps and filling the silence left by her stolen hearing. In losing her ears, she had gained a new way to listen, one that no one could silence or take away. And as the stones shared their truths, Zara began to understand that the noise she once feared was nothing compared to the powerful silence that now spoke volumes. The riverbank became Zara's refuge. Each evening at dusk, when the sky shifted to shades of violet and gold, she would make her way there, barefoot and quiet, carrying only a small woven basket. The soft earth welcomed her feet, and the gentle murmur of the flowing water reached her not through ears, but through her very being, a soothing rhythm that calmed the storm within her heart. Along the shore lay countless smooth stones, polished by years of water and wind, each one unique in shape and color. Zara would settle down among them, placing her hands gently on their cool surfaces, closing her eyes to the world she could no longer hear. It was here, in that silent communion, that the stones began to murmur once more, subtle vibrations that tickled her skin, whispered through her breath, and pulsed in time with her heartbeat. At first, the sensations were faint and confusing. She had never imagined stones could speak, but the silence had opened her senses in ways she hadn't known possible. The soft buzzing under her palms seemed like a secret language, an ancient dialogue between the earth and those willing to listen with more than ears. Each evening, Zara returned to the riverbank, learning to quiet her restless thoughts, to breathe deeply and feel the pulse beneath her skin. The stones responded, growing warmer beneath her touch, sending ripples of energy that coursed through her limbs. They shared images, flashes of distant memories, echoes of voices long past, and whispers of truths tangled in shadow. One particular stone, darker than the rest and shaped like a heart cracked in two, held a special power. When Zara pressed her palm against it, she felt a surge of warmth and a rush of visions flooding her mind. She saw a woman's face, gentle, kind, eyes filled with sorrow and love. It was her mother. In the vision, her mother spoke without words, her silent lips moving in a language Zara felt in her soul. She saw the betrayal, the pain hidden behind smiles and false kindness. Muna, her stepmother, was not just cruel but a traitor who had stolen what was precious, weaving lies and darkness into the family's story. Tears slid silently down Zara's cheeks, not from grief alone but from the clarity of truth at last. The stones whispered around her, sharing their ancient wisdom. The past could not be erased, and the earth itself remembered every wound inflicted in shadow. Though her ears were broken, Zara's heart was wide open. The murmuring ground became a sacred place where she learned that silence was not absence but a deeper kind of presence. It was here she vowed to honor her mother's memory, to uncover the hidden truths, and to transform pain into power. As the river flowed endlessly beside her, Zara understood that the stones were more than just rock. They were keepers of stories, witnesses to justice, and guides for those brave enough to listen beyond sound. And she was ready to listen. Zara's days grew quieter, but her world inside brimmed with stories told in the language of stones. After discovering the secret murmurs at the riverbank, she began to collect special pebbles, smooth, jagged, dark, and light, each one unique and alive with its own voice. She filled her small woven basket and pockets with them, carrying their hidden memories wherever she went. The villagers whispered behind their hands and watched her with suspicion. To them, Zara's barefoot wanderings and her silence were strange enough, but the rocks she carried made her seem mad, as if she carried the weight of unseen burdens. Children dared not play near her, and neighbors crossed the street to avoid her path. Yet Zara paid no mind. Her connection to the stones deepened every day. Each pebble sang a different tune in the quiet of her palms, a whisper of a forgotten ritual, the laughter of children long gone, the cry of a broken promise. Some stones carried memories of joy, others of sorrow. Some spoke of harvest festivals that had vanished with time, others held echoes of betrayals and secrets the village elders tried desperately to hide. Zara soon realized the stones were fragments of the village's buried history, stories erased from oral tradition, wiped from written records, buried beneath layers of fear and silence. As she listened, she learned about forgotten laws, broken alliances, and the silent suffering of women whose voices had been crushed. One day, A rough-edged stone showed her a vision of the stepmother Muna in shadow, manipulating elders and twisting truth to keep power for herself. Another smooth, blue pebble revealed the face of Zara's mother, smiling softly before the stepmother's cruelty took hold. The stones didn't just tell stories, they revealed truths that many had tried to erase. With each stone, Zara felt her understanding grow, her purpose becoming clearer. The villagers might scorn her now, but she was becoming the keeper of their true history, a living archive of the voices the earth refused to forget. Slowly, the stones began to weave a path forward, one that would lead her to justice and healing, guided by the whispers beneath her feet. Despite the loneliness, Zara's spirit was steady. She no longer feared the silence or the scorn. Instead, she embraced the stones' voices and her own growing power to listen beyond words. In her hands, the pebbles were not just rocks. They were keys unlocking the past and lighting a path toward a future where truth could finally be heard. Zara sat quietly on the worn wooden bench near the edge of the village, clutching a small black stone she had found buried beneath the wildflowers near her mother's grave. Unlike the other stones she carried, this one felt heavy with sorrow, cold and slick in her palm, as if it carried a secret too painful to speak aloud. As she held it close, the stone trembled faintly and a single slow drop of moisture seeped from its smooth surface, like a tear. Zara's breath caught. The stone was crying. In that moment, a flood of images filled her mind. She saw her mother's bright smile fading to pale lips, her body growing weak not from the sickness everyone believed, but from something far more sinister, poison seeping silently into her veins. She saw shadowed figures whispering in dark corners, a cup passed in secret, a cruel hand hidden beneath a cloak. Her mother's death was not a natural one, but a quiet murder, buried beneath lies and silence. Zara's heart pounded, tears streaming down her own cheeks. The stone's sorrow was her sorrow, the truth of the woman she loved stolen away, buried by those who wanted power and control. From that day the stones began to hum louder when Muna, her stepmother, was near. The gentle murmurs of the riverbank turned into low, urgent vibrations beneath Zara's feet. The smooth pebbles rattled softly in her basket, as if warning her of approaching danger. Zara could feel the stones' growing alarm, as if the earth itself was awakening to the injustice. Muna's presence was no longer just a source of fear, it was a signal. The stones revealed the shadow she cast over the village, the lies, the cruelty, the hidden sins. They sang of the poison that had taken Zara's mother, and the lies that kept the truth buried. Though Zara's ears could no longer hear the voices of people, through the stones she heard a deeper, ancient voice, the voice of the earth remembering. The black stone that cried was a sentinel of truth, reminding her that the past could not be erased, and that one day justice would come. As the stones hummed louder and the night grew quiet, Zara knew she was not alone. The stones spoke, the earth listened, and the truth waited to be set free. Zara moved through the village under the cloak of night, her bare feet silent against the cold earth. In her hands she carried a small collection of stones, smooth river pebbles, black shards and speckled rocks, each pulsing faintly with the murmurs she had learned to understand. One by one she left them carefully on doorsteps, near hearths tucked beneath flower pots, and by the thresholds of those who lived in fear or denial. She did not speak. Her lips were sealed, her eyes steady and quiet, but the stones she left behind whispered with a power far greater than words. Each stone carried a fragment of the hidden truths that tangled beneath the surface of village life, the old betrayals, the silenced voices, the forgotten promises. As the stones settled into place, the village began to change in ways no one could see at first. That night dreams came to many. Elders who had long held the village's secrets awoke with unsettled hearts. In their sleep, they heard soft voices, whispers of names never spoken aloud, echoes of wrongs buried deep, and the faces of those they had tried to erase from memory. Children, too, stirred with new understanding, awakening with eyes wide and minds curious about the quiet girl who moved without sound. Wordless, the children began to follow Zara during the day, trailing behind her like shadows. They copied her silence, walking barefoot, clutching stones they found along the path, and listening in a way no adult dared. In their quiet eyes was a spark of awakening, a hope that perhaps the truth could still be heard, even if no one spoke it aloud. But not everyone welcomed this awakening. Muna, Zara's stepmother, paced restlessly through the darkened rooms of her home, her paranoia growing with every whispered tale she caught on the wind. She sensed the shifting currents beneath the village, the stirrings of something old and powerful breaking through the fragile peace she had tried so hard to maintain. When she learned of the stones appearing at doorsteps and the strange dreams troubling the villagers, Fear twisted her heart into knots. In a fit of rage and desperation, Muna called the village council, accusing Zara of witchcraft. She painted the silent girl as a dark force, a bearer of curses and shadows. "She walks with the spirits of the earth," Muna declared, voice sharp with venom, "bringing chaos where there was order. She breaks the laws of our ancestors, and her stones are marks of evil." The elders murmured uncertainly, torn between old fears and the faint stirrings of truth that even they could not deny. Some saw in Zara's silence a threat to their authority, while others felt the weight of guilt pressing against their hearts. Zara did not defend herself. She did not cry or plead. Instead, she gathered her stones close, the whispers growing louder beneath her skin, filling the silence with a quiet strength. Though her ears no longer heard the words of men, through the stones she listened to the earth's ancient voice, steady, patient, and unyielding. As the village held its breath, caught between fear and awakening, Zara's silence became a gathering, a quiet resistance that no accusation could break. The stones had spoken, the dreams had come, and the truth was rising like a tide beneath the still surface of the village. And in the growing silence, a new story was beginning to unfold, one where voices long lost might finally be heard, not with sound, but with the deep, unshakable language of the earth itself. Zara's bare feet pressed gently into the soft earth as she climbed the sacred hill, the oldest stone wrapped carefully in cloth and cradled against her chest. The path was steep, worn by centuries of footsteps, and the air grew thinner, cooler as she ascended. Around her, the village lay quiet, a distant hum beneath the vast sky, but Zara's heart beat with a steady rhythm, an unspoken connection to the land she had never truly known until now. The summit was a place of stillness, where the wind whispered secrets through ancient trees and stones older than memory stood sentinel. Here the world felt different, charged with a presence both fierce and gentle, like the breath of the earth itself. With reverence, Zara knelt and unwrapped the cloth, revealing the black pebble that had cried and whispered to her since the day she found it by her mother's grave. She placed the stone carefully on the ground, right at the hill's peak. The moment it touched the earth, a subtle tremor ran through the ground beneath her fingers, as if the mountain itself had awakened. Zara closed her eyes, breathing deeply, letting the vibrations course through her body, soft pulses that spoke not in words, but in feelings deeper than language. The mountain's voice was not heard with ears, but felt with every fiber of her being. It was a warmth that spread from her feet through her limbs, a deep-rooted hum that resonated with memories buried in the soil and stones. In that silence, visions flickered behind her closed eyelids, scenes of ancestors gathering here, hands pressed to the earth, voices raised in chants lost to time, and the sacred bond between people and land. Zara felt the weight of history settle over her, heavy yet comforting. She was no longer just a girl who listened. She was part of something greater, a living thread woven into the tapestry of the mountain's memory. The earth beneath her seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat, acknowledging her as a vessel for its stories and truths. As the trembling settled, a profound calm enveloped her. The mountain had named her, the new keeper of memory. It was a title unspoken, understood in the language of vibration and vision. Zara opened her eyes to the sky, a quiet smile touching her lips. She was ready. The climb down was lighter, filled with a newfound strength and purpose. She carried the mountain's voice inside her, a sacred duty to protect the past and guide the future. Wherever she walked, the earth would remember, and through her, so would the village. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the village square where the trial was to take place. The entire community had gathered, their faces a mixture of curiosity, fear, and expectation. At the center stood Zara, silent but resolute, clutching a smooth stone that seemed to pulse faintly in her hand. Nearby, Muna, her stepmother, wore a mask of defiance, ready to twist the tale and paint Zara as a witch and a liar. The elders, perched on their raised platform, called the trial to order, their voices heavy with authority. Muna stepped forward first, weaving a web of accusations against Zara, claiming madness, deception, and disrespect toward sacred traditions. She spoke of curses and dark magic, hoping to sway the crowd's fear to her side. But as her words grew more desperate, Zara calmly placed the stone before her on the dusty ground. The moment Muna's shadow passed over the stone, it shuddered violently, trembling with an intensity that silenced the murmurs of the crowd. The rock vibrated as though alive, reacting not to mere presence, but to the weight of falsehoods. Each lie Muna uttered made the stone pulse faster, its subtle hum growing into a roar felt in the bones of all who watched. Gasps rippled through the gathering as the stone's trembling exposed Muna's deception. The villagers' eyes turned from suspicion to understanding, the truth unraveling before them in a way no spoken word could contest. The elders conferred briefly, their faces grave but resolute. Finally, the chief elder spoke, his voice carrying the weight of the mountain itself. By unanimous decree, Muna was exiled, cast out from the village she had once ruled with cruelty and fear. The villagers nodded solemnly, some with tears, others with quiet relief. As Muna was led away, the stone's violent vibration began to fade. Slowly, it settled into a deep, peaceful silence, as if the earth itself sighed in relief. The murmuring stones hushed, waiting patiently, their voices held for a time when truth would again need a witness. Zara stood tall in the stillness, her silent gaze promising that though the stones had fallen quiet, their watch had only just begun. Zara stood at the edge of the village, sunlight filtering through the leaves and casting dappled patterns on the earth. The stones she had gathered over the years lay arranged in small circles around her, each one humming softly with the memories they held. Word had spread beyond the village boundaries, people came seeking her help. Those born without hearing, those silenced by pain, those longing for a voice in a world too loud or too cruel. She welcomed them all, her presence a calm harbor amid their storms. Though she no longer heard the world as others did, she listened in ways far deeper. The stones whispered secrets through vibrations felt beneath her fingers. The earth spoke to her in the rhythm of growing roots and shifting soil. And within her own soul, a profound connection pulsed, weaving all these voices into a symphony only she could understand. Children born deaf sat beside her, their eyes wide as she placed smooth river rocks in their hands, encouraging them to feel the faint murmurs of history and hope. The elderly who had long suffered in silence found solace in her quiet company, as she guided them to listen not for sounds but for the stories etched into the stones beneath their feet. Zara's gift was no longer a curse but a bridge, one that connected the unseen and unheard. Her touch healed wounds both physical and unseen, the warmth of her hands carrying the energy of earth and stone. Villagers whispered of miracles, gardens flourishing where she walked, illnesses easing after her gentle presence. Her silence was full of meaning, richer than any spoken word. Through stone and soil, Zara heard the village's heartbeat, its joys, sorrows, secrets and truths. She taught others to listen beyond ears, to find the language in the world around them. Her stepmother's shadow had long faded, replaced by the light of a new keeper of memory. Though Zara never spoke aloud, her legacy was loud and clear. Sometimes the truest hearing comes not from sound but from the heart and earth beneath us. Years passed. The village that once whispered behind cupped hands about a cursed girl had changed, subtly and then suddenly. No one could say when exactly the trees began to grow where Zara had once walked barefoot, leaving behind smooth stones like breadcrumbs for memory. But grow they did, twisted trees, strange and graceful, their bark marked with rippling rings that shimmered faintly in moonlight. Their roots, exposed like open veins across the earth, hummed with a quiet vibration that the elders at first dismissed as wind or imagination. But others knew. Those who had dreamed of forgotten truths, who had been visited by the silence Zara had taught them, knew the trees were not ordinary. People began to gather at their bases. They sat beneath their canopy of dark green leaves, not to escape the sun but to listen. They didn't speak. They breathed and waited. And slowly they heard, though not through ears. They heard in the tingling of their spines, in the warmth between their palms pressed to the roots, in the flicker of old memories they had long buried. The stones Zara once carried were no longer scattered. They were absorbed. Swallowed by the soil and fed into the wood, their memories now rooted in nature. What once lived in silence now lived in echo, inside the trunks, beneath the ground. And in the middle of this quiet revolution was a child. She was born on a night when the moon was hidden behind heavy clouds, and the wind howled as if mourning something ancient. The midwife held the newborn gently, her face creased with awe. "She has no eardrums," she whispered, and the women surrounding the fire exchanged glances. Not fear. Not pity. Wonder. They named her Nyara, and from the moment she took her first step, she moved with a strange certainty, as if led by a music no one else could hear. She did not speak, but her eyes watched everything. Her fingers traced lines in the dust, sometimes repeating symbols no one remembered teaching her. The first time she wandered near the grove of whispering trees, her mother panicked and tried to pull her back. But Nyara stayed, pressing both hands to the exposed roots and closing her eyes. When she opened them again she was crying, not from fear but recognition. She had heard something. From that day forward, Nyara visited the trees daily. She would lie flat on the earth, her earless head resting against the roots, and hum softly, not a sound of voice but of vibration. Elders noticed her returning home calmer, her hands sketching unfamiliar but ancient-looking patterns in the air. Some began following her. Others joined. Children started to mimic her, resting against trunks, closing their eyes. It became known as the Listening Grove. Nyara never learned language in the way others did, but she learned something older. Her mind wrapped around the pulses in the soil, the rhythms in the stone, the quiet voices buried beneath bark. Sometimes she would point to a tree and lead someone to it, someone grieving, someone lost, and after a few hours beneath its branches, they would weep or laugh or rise with new clarity. It was said the trees gave counsel and Nyara was their bridge. One afternoon an old woman, one of the last still living who had known Zara, came to the grove. She brought with her a pouch wrapped in red cloth. Inside was a single smooth stone, once given to her by Zara before the final trial. She had never dared place it in the ground. She had kept it as memory. But now her hands trembled as she passed it to Nyara. The girl took it with reverence as if recognizing an old friend. She kissed it once, pressed it to her chest, then buried it beneath the central tree. That night the villagers swore the wind changed. It carried not just coolness but music without instruments, without words. Just feeling. Like the kind Zara had spoken of, the kind that did not need to be heard to be understood. In the seasons that followed, things began to shift across the village. Decisions once made by the elders alone were now brought to the Listening Grove. Children were encouraged to spend time in silence before learning to speak. Songs were sung not just with mouths, but with drumbeats, gestures, and the tapping of stones. The disabled, once hidden or pitted, were now seen as sacred listeners. And all of this pulsed from the legacy Zara had left, not in voice but in vibration. Nyara, still young, became something more than a girl. She became a symbol. She carried no title, no staff or robe. But when disputes arose, when grief fell heavy, when joy needed grounding, people sought her presence. She never answered with words. But her presence was enough. A look, a nod, a hand pressed to a tree. And somehow truth revealed itself. It was said that the stones themselves had chosen her. That Zara, before her final breath, had whispered to the roots of the mountain, and that whisper became Yara's name. No one knew for sure. But sometimes, when Yara slept beside the oldest tree, the one said to have grown from Zara's final stone, she dreamed of smoke and silence and a woman with no ears smiling at her through the mist. One day, as she traced circles in the dirt for the younger children, a boy asked her, "Will the trees stop talking when we die?" Nyara paused. She closed her eyes and touched the ground. Then she drew a spiral, wide and unending. The boy watched, then nodded. "No ending?" he guessed. She smiled. The villagers did not need to be told. They knew. The stones had returned to the earth, but their memory was immortal. Every footstep on the soil was a conversation. Every tree planted was a monument. And every child born with silence in their ears might one day hear the roar of memory in the roots. In time, the story of Zara and Yara became more than legend. It became practice. New generations learned to speak with their hands, to drum with meaning, to sit still and listen to what could not be heard. They planted more trees, marked their trunks with etched stones. The Listening Grove expanded, no longer a place of mourning but of becoming. And in the middle of it all, Nyara grew. Her hair streaked with silver early as if wisdom ran ahead of time. She never left the village. She never needed to. People came to her from far away, from other villages where ears still ruled truth. Some scoffed, thinking it superstition. But when they sat beneath the trees, even the most skeptical found themselves weeping or humming, or sitting in odd silence for hours. Something always shifted. And always before they left, Nyara would offer them a single stone, smooth, quiet, full of remembering. She never told them what it meant. But often years later they would return, holding that stone like a heart and whisper, "Now I understand." Zara had once heard truth through stones. Nyara now helped the world listen through roots. And the earth, long buried in silence, was finally speaking again. In a valley not far from the Listening Grove, where roots whispered and stones hummed with memory, Zara planted the foundation of something the world had never seen. Not with bricks or walls, not with banners or noise. She marked the land with silence, and from it grew a sanctuary, for the unheard, the forgotten, the feared. She called it nothing. Gave it no name. But word spread fast. People began to whisper, "There is a place where even silence speaks." Children born into quiet, shunned by families who saw deafness as a burden, were brought to her in the early morning mist. Survivors of violence who flinched at sound found their way through dusk's hush. Others simply came because their voices had been stolen, not by fate but by grief, cruelty, or fear. They arrived with broken tongues, trembling hands, wounded pasts. Zara welcomed them all. Her hair now streaked with smoke gray, her steps deliberate as wind carving rock. She stood at the threshold of the grove with no gate, no arch. Just her presence. The moment the children stepped onto her land, they felt it. Something ancient, deep beneath the surface, like the soil itself waited for them. There were no lessons in the beginning. Only stillness. She showed them how to place palms to the ground, to feel the small tremors of beetles beneath bark, the echo of bird wings in hollow trunks. She pressed their bare feet into wet earth, letting them sense the drumbeat of the world beneath them. She took them to the river and had them sit knee-deep in water, eyes closed, feeling the language of current and stone. Some wept. Some sat frozen for hours. Some only returned once, but those who stayed began to change. They did not speak as other children did. They used movement, expression, breath. They learned that listening did not require ears. They communicated in patterns, not just signs, fingers tapping against tree bark, arms flowing like branches in wind. They built symbols from seeds and sticks. They dreamed and then shaped those dreams in clay, in sand, in charcoal against wood. There were no punishments in Zara's sanctuary. Only observation. If a child lashed out, she offered them a stone, black, heavy, grounding. Hold it, she would gesture. Feel it. What does it remember? And somehow the rage would soften. The grief would spill. And they would draw what they could not say. She told no stories of Muna, her stepmother, in the beginning. The children heard only whispers from villagers who came to deliver food or watch from afar. But eventually, one curious child placed a hand on Zara's chest and mimed pulling something out, as if extracting a memory. Zara took a breath, sat them all down beneath the twisted tree whose roots hummed deepest and began, not with words but with rhythm. She beat the earth with a stick. Slow. Steady. A long pause. Then 2 quick taps. The children listened with their bodies. She drew in the dirt. A house. A woman with harsh eyes. A girl curled beneath the floor. Then she drew a pair of earrings, shattered. A line of blood. A jagged silence. And then, a stone. A tree. A spiral. The children, without needing explanation, understood. They placed their hands gently on Zara's scars and kissed the soil where she had drawn her pain. They did not ask for more. Muna, now old and exiled, lived far beyond the ridge where even the wind rarely visited. Her story was not erased but retold gently. Zara refused to let her become a monster in the eyes of the children. People become cruel, she once gestured, when no one listens to them. But cruelty cannot stay where there is understanding. And so, Muna's tale became one of warning, but also of sadness, of what happens when the world closes its ears too tightly. As more children came, Zara's sanctuary grew, not in size but in depth. They carved spaces into the ground, underground hollows where the earth's voice was louder. In one of them, a boy who hadn't spoken in 4 years painted an entire story along the walls. A birth, a fire, a mother lost. The painting vibrated with color. It shimmered when firelight touched it. Zara called that chamber the memory room. Soon, children who could hear began asking to stay. Not because they were forced to, but because they wanted to understand. Zara never turned them away. She simply handed them a stone and smiled. Listen, she sighed. And so, the world of sound met the world of silence, not in conflict but in curiosity. Local elders, once wary, began to sit in on lessons. One by one they laid aside their authority and became learners. A warrior who had lost his hearing in battle came and stayed for weeks, learning to dream again by feeling river pebbles. A midwife who had delivered Zara now offered to bring new mothers to the grove, so their children would grow up knowing silence as strength. Over time the village changed. The market built a silent hour every morning, where no one shouted and buyers signed their offers. The temple drummers learned rhythms based on Zara's original beats, those that spoke pain, joy, truth. Children raised at the sanctuary became council members, interpreters, healers. One girl became a woodworker, crafting instruments that could be heard only through vibration on skin. Another boy created a system of writing through textured threads, touchable language. He called it thread song. And through it all, Zara remained at the center. She did not claim titles. She did not preach. She walked barefoot between trees, knelt to feel the dirt, and sat among the children. They still called her teacher, not with mouths but with hands over hearts, heads bowed in gratitude. Once a year, on the night of her transformation, they held a silent festival. No music played. No voices rose. But light danced across the sanctuary, candles, fireflies, stars. People wore necklaces made of small stones and let their bodies move like smoke, like memory. It was a celebration not of Zara's suffering, but of the silence that saved her. And through that saved them. One evening, as the sky turned silver blue, a little girl approached Zara with a strange stone, sharp-edged, not smooth, as if freshly broken. The girl placed it in Zara's palm, eyes wide. Zara closed her fingers around it and stilled. A vision came. Not of the past, but of the future. A time when cities would grow beyond the valley, where noise would return in iron machines and flashing lights. But also, a time when people would seek stillness again. And her school, this sanctuary, would stand not as relic, but as seed. Others would plant their own groves. Others would teach through vibration, touch, earth. The silence would spread, not as absence but as language. When she opened her eyes, the girl smiled, already knowing. Zara kissed the child's forehead and returned the sharp stone. "Keep it," she signed. "It is the beginning." And so the first silent school lived, not in buildings or names, but in every heart that dared to hear without ears, every soul that listened deeply enough to understand. What began in pain had become a world of peace. And the stones, still buried beneath the trees, hummed their approval. At first they thought it was a dream. The soft humming that stirred in the roots of their sleep, that pulsed beneath their pillows, that echoed not in their ears but in their chests. It came not from wind, nor water, nor beast. It came from the ground itself. A low, steady song, ancient, patient, full of something no one had words for. It began after the third spring since the founding of Zara's sanctuary. The night air had grown warmer, thick with jasmine and memory. An old farmer named Aba was the first to speak of it. Well, not speak but sign, trembling as he pressed his hands against the ground and felt the rhythm in his bones. Others had noticed it too. Children whispered of dreams where stones sang lullabies. Mothers found their infants sleeping deeper, smiles on their faces as though rocked by lullabies that never left the lips. The humming came only at night. Faint, steady. It did not disturb. It invited. Zara, older now, her silver hair braided with threads of cloth given to her by former students, was not surprised. She had long known the earth remembered. That stones kept secrets. That trees hummed with the echo of truths too vast for language. But even she had not expected the song to spread so far. One night, when the moon hung like a pale drum above the hills, Zara gathered the villagers near the listening grove. She knelt, palms flat on the soil, and closed her eyes. The others copied her. One by one they lowered themselves, farmers, widows, children, merchants, until the entire clearing was silent, still, and listening. The hum rose through them like warmth. It was not music in any way they had known it before. No melody, no harmony. Just a rhythm. Deep, steady, timeless. A language without words, a heartbeat without blood. Zara opened her eyes and signed slowly, "This is the song beneath the village. It has always been here. But now we are ready to hear it." The villagers stared at her in awe, not questioning, not doubting. They had seen too many miracles shaped from silence, too many truths carried by stone, to dismiss what their skin now felt. Zara began teaching them, not with instructions but with presence. She showed them how to walk barefoot through the fields in the early hours, when the hum was strongest. How to touch the bark of the twisted trees, feel the... At first they thought it was a dream. The soft humming that stirred in the roots of their sleep, that pulsed beneath their pillows, that echoed not in their ears but in their chests. It came not from wind, nor water, nor beast. It came from the ground itself. A low, steady song, ancient, patient, full of something no one had words for. It began after the third spring since the founding of Zara's sanctuary. The night air had grown warmer, thick with jasmine and memory. An old farmer named Aba was the first to speak of it. Well, not speak but sign, trembling as he pressed his hands against the ground and felt the rhythm in his bones. Others had noticed it too. Children whispered of dreams where stones sang lullabies. Mothers found their infants sleeping deeper, smiles on their faces as though rocked by lullabies that never left the lips. The humming came only at night. Faint, steady. It did not disturb. It invited. Zara, older now, her silver hair braided with threads of cloth given to her by former students, was not surprised. She had long known the earth remembered. That stones kept secrets. That trees hummed with the echo of truths too vast for language. But even she had not expected the song to spread so far. One night, when the moon hung like a pale drum above the hills, Zara gathered the villagers near the listening grove. She knelt, palms flat on the soil, and closed her eyes. The others copied her. One by one they lowered themselves, farmers, widows, children, merchants, until the entire clearing was silent, still, and listening. The hum rose through them like warmth. It was not music in any way they had known it before. No melody, no harmony. Just a rhythm. Deep, steady, timeless. A language without words, a heartbeat without blood. Zara opened her eyes and signed slowly, "This is the song beneath the village. It has always been here. But now we are ready to hear it." The villagers stared at her in awe, not questioning, not doubting. They had seen too many miracles shaped from silence, too many truths carried by stone, to dismiss what their skin now felt. Zara began teaching them, not with instructions but with presence. She showed them how to walk barefoot through the fields in the early hours, when the hum was strongest. How to touch the bark of the twisted trees, feel the slow vibrations that pulsed like slow-moving breath. How to lie flat on the riverbank and let the ground sing to their spines. The village transformed. The blacksmiths began tempering their metal in silence, timing each strike with the rhythm they felt in their feet. Harvesters no longer shouted across fields, but signaled with hand movements that mimicked the rise and fall of the hum. Children played new games, choreographed dances that matched the ground's vibrations, hide and seek in the dark with steps as soft as wind. One by one, every aspect of life shifted toward harmony. Zara taught them to live not in resistance to the land, but in rhythm with it. They planted crops only after lying in the soil and waiting for the hum to rise and quicken, a sign the earth was ready. They built homes with their hands pressed to the ground, choosing locations where the song was clearest. They even slept differently, curled around one another, palms pressed to stone or root, cradled by the earth's music. Even arguments changed. When disagreements rose, the village council would gather in silence. No words were allowed. Only the hum. They would sit, feel, breathe. And in that shared stillness, truths would surface. Tempers cooled. Grievances found form not in fury but in dust drawings and quiet gestures. But with all change comes challenge. Outsiders heard of the village where no one shouted, where people moved like wind and worked like waves. Some came to watch, some came to steal the peace. Merchants mocked them, the mute market, they jeered. Soldiers from distant hills came with clanging boots, demanding taxes and allegiance. Zara did not resist with swords or speech. She simply offered them silence. When one officer demanded her surrender, she handed him a stone. "What is this?" he spat. "Truth," she signed. He threw it aside. But that night, he dreamed of his mother, long dead, holding that same stone and singing a lullaby he hadn't heard in decades. He woke shaking, weeping, and left before dawn, never to return. The villagers did not fear anymore. The song beneath the village was their shield. It warned them. It soothed them. It guided them. Seasons passed, and with each year new songs emerged. In summer the hum became faster, warmer, full of fire and dance. In autumn it slowed, deepened, carried a hint of morning and memory. Winter brought the softest vibrations, barely there, like a heartbeat sleeping. And spring sang like rebirth, like laughter through rain, like the first breath after sorrow. Elders began keeping song journals, not of words but textures. They traced what they felt onto bark, into clay, with marks and curves that captured rhythm. Each journal was passed to a child, who would carry it until they were ready to add their own verse. These silent books became sacred, kept in hollows within the oldest trees, guarded not by locks but by trust. It was during one particularly loud spring hum, loud not in volume but in energy, that a young girl named Keiji placed both hands on the ground and burst into tears. Zara approached her gently. "It sings to me," Keiji signed. "It knows my name." Zara nodded. "It remembers all of us. Even before we are born." Keiji had been born deaf like Zara. But unlike Zara, her silence had never felt peaceful. It had been full of pressure, expectations, isolation. Until the day she stepped barefoot into Zara's sanctuary and felt the hum for the first time. From that moment, Keiji began creating new instruments, not for sound but for feeling. She carved chairs with vibrating panels, crafted wind chimes that echoed through fingertips, invented tiles that changed texture based on foot pressure. She called them earth songs. Under Zara's mentorship, Keiji opened a new circle within the sanctuary, a place for innovation, where silence became not just comfort but creation. Children built bridges that thrummed beneath feet, paths that hummed directions, and stones that glowed with stored rhythm. It was not magic. It was memory, science, patience. The village no longer hid the past. Muna's story was now told in full, not just her cruelty but her pain, her loneliness, her exile. Her name was carved into one of the twisted tree trunks, not to honor her but to acknowledge her place in the rhythm. Even the stones that hummed near her old home were different, rougher, darker, but still singing. Zara walked slower these days, often leaning on children who had once needed her. She would sit for hours by the tree that hummed most deeply, her hands pressed to its roots, eyes closed, lips curled in a quiet smile. One evening, as stars blossomed above the hills, she gathered the village once more. She said nothing. Simply lay down in the center of the listening grove and placed a new stone on her chest. It was smooth, warm, and humming faintly. The villagers circled her. They understood. Zara had taught them everything: how to listen without ears, how to speak without mouths, how to remember without words. Now she was teaching them how to return. They stayed with her all night, feeling the song. Some cried. Others smiled. No one spoke. At dawn Zara was still. But the ground beneath her beat stronger than ever. Not mourning. Not silence. Song. She became the deepest note in the village's rhythm. The oldest stone in their sanctuary. The whisper beneath their saws. And as the seasons turned, as new children arrived, they would lie in the earth and say, "Can you feel that? That is Zara. She is still singing." And so, the song beneath the village never ended. It grew, rooted in silence, fed by memory, and carried by every soul that dared to hear not with ears, but with the deepest part of themselves.